The hell mansion glowed like a cathedral of Wales. Crystal chandeliers dripped from ceilings as tall as trees. Andy polished marble floors gleamed like frozen water under the light. Chauffeurs opened the doors of sleek black cars while women in gowns and men in tailored suits walked up the red carpeted steps. It was another evening of power in America, the kind where fortunes were exchanged over wine and racism hid in polite laughter. Raymond Hale, billionaire investor and ruthless dealmaker, stood at the entrance, greeting his guests with a smile that never reached his eyes. He was tall, silver-haired, and he carried himself like a man who believed the world spun only because he thought it did. To the cameras outside, he was a philanthropist. To those who knew him, he was a storm dressed in a silk tie. Inside the house, the stuff moved like shadows. Trays of champagne, silver dishes, folded napkins, every detail perfect. Among them was Vanessa Carter, a black maid in a crisp white uniform. Her job was to serve, to blend in, to disappear. That was the rule of her world. You're seen when needed, invisible when not. Vanessa kept her eyes low, but her mind was awake. Every conversation, every laugh, every casual insult toward the help was noted in silence. She had been working for the Hales for just under a year. She knew how the rich behaved when they thought no more one important was listening. Careful with the silverware, sweetheart, one guest sneered when she set his plate. These pieces cost more than your monthly paycheck. She smiled politely, the way she always did. She had learned that a smile was armor, but behind it, she stored every word like coal in a furnace. As dinner began, the grand hall filled with chatter. Glasses clinked, forks scraped against porcelain, and the ego swelled with every joke and deal. Hale sat at the head of the long mahogany table, surveying his empire of friends, rivals, and the opportunists. Then, with a sudden shift, he tapped his glass. The room quieted. "You wonder, Hale Saib?" His voice smooth. "How many of you are truly citizens of the world? How many of you understand beyond money?" Guests exchanged looks, unsure of where he was going. Hale smirked, then spoke again, this time in flawless Arabic. The words flowed like water, rhythmic and commanding. It wasn't just language, it was dominance. He had studied it for years, proud of the fact that he could slip into conversations foreign to others. To him, it was another way to prove superiority. When he finished, he leaned back, eyes glittering. The room sat frozen, not a single guest understood. That silence, that helplessness pleased him. He was about to translate, about to mock their ignorance, when a voice rose from the corner. Soft, steady, but clear. When you speak only to show you are above others, your words carry no more wisdom, only weight. Vanessa sighed in perfect Arabic. Forks paused mid-air. Glasses hovered. The billionaire's smirk cracked. Every head in the room turned toward the maid standing by the wall, tray in hand, her eyes meeting Hale's with quiet defiance. The silence that followed was heavy. For the first time all evening, Raymond Hale was not in control. The silence stretched long enough for everyone to feel its weight. Forks hovered. Wine glasses trembled slightly in manicured hands. No more one breathed too loudly. Raymond Hale's eyes narrowed at Vanessa like lasers. "Excuse me," he sighed finally, switching back to English. His voice carried its usual confidence, but there was a thin crack in it. Vanessa did not flinch. "He simply translated what you said, sir, for the benefit of the guests." Her tone was polite, measured, the exact way a maid was supposed to sound, except her words carried an undertone, a quiet refusal to be small. Around the table, the guests stirred. Wait, chuckled one senator, dabbing his lips with a napkin. Did she just speak Arabic?" "She did," whispered another guest, disbelief stretching across his face. "Andy fluently." Hale forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. Well, of course. The stuff picks up things here, Andy, sir. "That doesn't mean picked up," murmured a woman in a silver gown. "That was not picked up. That was perfect pronunciation." Vanessa lowered her eyes again, tray steady in her hands, but the room could not stop looking at her. For the first time that night, the richest people in America were studying the maid as if she had become the center of gravity. Andy Hale hated it. "Vanessa?" he sighed sharply. "Is it?" "Yes, sir." "Where did you learn Arabic?" She hesitated. The correct response, the safe response, was to apologize, to say she memorized a few phrases from a movie, to shrink back into invisibility. But something inside her refused. I studied it in college. She sighed evenly. I majored in linguistics. The table went silent again. A billionaire's guest, a banker from Chicago, frowned. College, then why are you? He let the question trail off. The rest implied. Why are you just a maid? Vanessa's lips passed the geyser. She gave no more answer. The weight of her silence told its own story. The senator shifted uncomfortably. Well, I'll be damned, you're probably more educated than half the folks sitting here. Some chuckled awkwardly, others avoided eye contact. Hale's knuckles tightened against the mahogany table. His little performance, the language trick that was meant to make him appear worldly and brilliant, had turned into a spotlight on the very person he paid to remain invisible. Enough, Hale sighed, waving his hand dismissively. We are not here to quiz the staff. Vanessa, back to your duties. But the damage was done. Conversations rippled quietly. She studied linguistics. She speaks Arabic. Every whisper chipped at the walls of Hale's authority. Vanessa turned away, carrying her tray to the sideboard, her back straight. She felt his gaze burning into her, but she did not tremble. Later that evening, dinner resumed, but the mood had shifted. Hale's jokes fell flat. His business stories, usually met with admiration, now landed with hollow laughter. Eyes kept darting toward Vanessa, the maid who had broken the silence. At one point, a guest asked Hale about the meaning of the Arabic passage he'd spoken. He began to translate, but another voice interrupted. Vanessa again. Her translation was smoother, richer, carrying not just the literal meaning but the poetry in the words. Unbelievable, sighed the woman in the silver gown, leaning back. She's better than you at it. Ray. The table erupted with laughter, sharp and cutting. Hale forced a smile, but inside, his pride bled. After dessert was served and the wine bottles emptied, the guests moved to the lounge for cigars and brandy. Vanessa cleared plates in the dining room, but she could still hear them. She's remarkable, sighed the senator. A maid with that kind of education, what a waste. No more, not a waste, sighed the banker. An example shows how this country wastes its talent when it doesn't look the right way. Their voices blurred into the clinking of glasses. Andy, then Hale's voice, low and tight. She's the help, nothing more. Don't romanticize it. Vanessa paused at the doorway, plate in hand. His words weren't surprising, but they still pierced. She swallowed hard, staring at her reflection in the silver platter, her face framed by a starched cap, a uniform meant to erase her. But tonight, the erasure wasn't working. Tonight, they had seen her. Later, in the kitchen, the staff buzzed about the moment. Girl, you should have seen his face, whispered a fellow maid, grinning wide, like somebody slapped him. You're gonna get in trouble, muttered another. Men like him don't like being shown up, especially not by us. Vanessa sighed nothing. She kept washing dishes, her hands steady though her heart raced. She knew the risks. One moment of standing tall could cost her everything, but another part of her, a part that had been buried beneath years of years and the polite smiles, was awake again. The room had gone silent because she had spoken. That silence was power. Upstairs, in Hale's study, Raymond Hale poured himself a glass of scotch, swirling it like he could drown his humiliation in the ember liquid. His daughter, Sophia, lingered at the doorway. She was impassive. Sophia sighed softly. Hale shot her a look. She embarrassed me. No more, father, she sighed, stepping closer. She revealed herself. There's a difference. He set the glass down sharply. Don't start. She's tough. Don't elevate her. Sophia held his gaze. She was used to his temper, his thunderous certainty. But tonight she saw cracks. And behind those cracks, she saw fear. Maybe you're afraid, she sighed gently, because the maid had more to say than the billionaire. Her words hung in the air. Hale sighed nothing. Sophia left him, sir, staring into his drink, the weight of the evening pressing down on him. The next morning, the mansion carried the aftertaste of last night's dinner. The crystal had been polished, the silver returned to its cabinet, Andy, the floors gleamed as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. For the first time in his life, Raymond Hale had been made small in his own house. He summoned Vanessa to his study. The study was a room of intimidation, mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound books, enamel heads mounted on the walls, a disc the size of a small car. The morning sun filtered through blinds, stripping Hale's face with light and the shadow. Vanessa entered quietly, her hands folded in front of her. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Hale didn't look up immediately. He pretended to be reviewing papers, signing his name with a heavy fountain pen. Finally, he set the pen down and he leaned back. "Yes." His voice was calm, but too calm, the kind of calm that hides a storm. "Last night, you stepped out of line." Vanessa's face remained still. He was only trying to help the guests understand. "Sid, help." He laughed without humor. "You embarrassed me. You turned a game, a harmless little game, into a spectacle." "With respect," she sighed quietly, "he didn't turn it into a spectacle." The silence did. His eyes narrowed. For a moment, they simply studied each other, the billionaire and the maid, predator and the prey. But Hale couldn't shake the unease. Why didn't she look afraid? "You're smart," he sighed finally. "Smarter than your station, clearly. But don't mistake this house for a university classroom. Here, your stuff and the stuff stay in their place." She nodded politely. "Understood, sir." But the way she sighed, the weight behind the words, told him she understood far more than he wanted. "Dismissed," he snapped. She turned to go, but paused at the door. "For what it's worth," she sighed, her back to him, "the world doesn't care much for places anymore. People notice, even when they pretend not to." Andy, then she left him alone with his anger. Vanessa's best that night. When the mansion quieted and the guests were gone, Vanessa sat in her small servant's room tucked behind the kitchen. It smelled faintly of detergent and the old wood. She pulled a worn notebook from her bag, the only thing she had kept from her college days. The pages were filled with notes in different languages: Arabic, French, Spanish, Mandarin. Her handwriting shifted depending on the script, each line a testament to years of study. She had been good, brilliant, even professors had told her she could be a translator for the United Nations, a scholar, a teacher who opened the world to others. But reality was colder than ambition. Scholarships ran dry. Job interviews ended with polite rejections when her face darkened the doorway. "We'll call you back," they'd say. They never did. Positions went to others with lighter skin, with last names easier to pronounce. Bills piled up. Dreams shrank. One day, instead of standing at a podium, she was scrubbing a marble floor. Her mother used to say, "Hold your head high, baby. Education is armor. No more one can strip it from you." But nights like this, sitting in a maid's room with her hands raw from cleaning, Vanessa wondered if armor mattered when doors still slammed shut in your face. Still, she refused to break. If life gave her silence, she would learn to fill it with words no more one expected. In the lounge a few days later, another gathering filled the Hale mansion, smaller this time, but no more less dripping with power. Hale couldn't resist hosting. He needed to reclaim his throne. Vanessa served drinks again, moving quietly, listening. "So, Lay," sighed a tech Cheo, puffing on a cigar. "I heard your maid speaks Arabic better than you. Is that true?" Laughter roared. Hale's jaw clenched. "She's tough," he sighed coldly. Nothing more. But Vanessa saw the glances. Some of the guests weren't laughing at her, they were laughing at him. His authority had cracked, and the cracks spread fast in the world of predators. As she poured another drink, one guest, a woman with kind eyes, leaned toward her. "Where did you study, dear?" Vanessa hesitated, then answered softly, "Howard University, Linguistics." The woman's brows rose. "Howard, that's no more small feat. Andy, you're here." Vanessa simply nodded. Hale barked across the room. "Enough chit-chat. She's not here to give her heirloom." The woman frowned, but sighed nothing more. The air thickened with unspoken truths. The breaking point later that night, when the last glass was cleared, Hale confronted Vanessa again in the hallway. "You are becoming a distraction," he sighed, voice low and sharp. "I don't intend to be." she replied. Then stop answering questions. Stop making yourself visible. Vanessa tilted her head slightly. I don't make myself visible, Mr. Hale. People choose to see me. That's the difference. For the first time, he had no more reply. Her words cut too close to the bone. He stepped closer, towering over her. Careful, he growled. One more step out of line, and you'll be gone. Do you understand? Her heart pounded, but her voice did not waver. I understand perfectly. She walked away before he could say another word. The Hell Mansion glittered once again with Wells and vanity. Another gala, another night for Raymond Hale to remind the world of his power. This one was larger, louder, more extravagant. Politicians, CEOs, celebrities, journalists all packed into the ballroom. Hale had planned it carefully. Tonight, he would repair his image. Tonight, the maid would vanish back into invisibility where she belonged. Vanessa moved silently among the guests, balancing trays of champagne, her eyes lowered but her ears open. She had heard the whispers leading up to this night. Raymond Hale's maid outshined him in his own house. She knew he hated it, and she knew tonight he'd strike back. The moment came during dinner. Hale rose, tapping his glass again the same way it all began. Ladies and gentlemen, he boomed. Tonight I'd like to demonstrate once again the richness of culture, the depth of knowledge that binds us as global leaders. He smiled broadly, his eyes scanning the crowd before landing deliberately on Vanessa. You will speak in Arabic again, he sighed. But this time, I wonder if our multilingual maid can keep up. The guests chuckled. Some laughed nervously, others leaned forward with curiosity. Hale's grin was a predator's grin. He wanted her to falter, to stumble, to prove she was nothing more than a lucky parlor trick. He launched into Arabic longer, faster, more complex than before. His words poured out like a waterfall, deliberately twisted with uncommon idioms and archaic expressions. It was a performance meant to humiliate. When he finished, the room applauded, and then all eyes turned to Vanessa. She stood perfectly still, tray balanced on one hand. Slowly, she set it down, wiped her hands on her apron, and lifted her chin. Her voice came calm, steady, resonant. A man who uses language to belittle others proves not his knowledge, but his weakness. For wisdom is not in how many words one knows, but in how many hearts one reaches. The translation was flawless, but it wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them. Each syllable struck like a hammer, each phrase carried like a song. The room went dead silent. Hale's face flushed crimson. That's not what he said, he barked. Vanessa met his gaze. No more, that's what you meant. Gasps rippled across the table. A senator leaned back, muttering, well, damn. The woman in the silver gown from before whispered, she's not just translating, she's teaching. Hale slammed his fist on the table. You forget yourself, girl. And he said it was the mask stripped away, the venom of his pride spilling out. The word girl spat like poison, dripping with centuries of racism and entitlement. But Vanessa did not flinch. She stepped forward, her voice rising, carrying over the chandelier room. I don't forget myself, Mr. Hale. I remember exactly who I am. I am a black woman who studied harder than most people at this table. I learned your languages, your rules, your systems only to find the door still closed because my skin wasn't the right color. I remember being told I was overqualified for jobs I applied to. I remember watching others with less education, less skill, less hard work into opportunities denied to me. And I remember the day I put on this uniform because rent doesn't wait for fairness. Her words struck like thunder. No more one dared interrupt. She pointed, gently, not with anger but with truth. You sit here surrounded by wealth, by power, by influence, and yet you treat people like me as invisible. But last week, when he spoke, you all heard me. You saw me, and that silence in the room, that wasn't weakness. That was power, my power. A woman at the far end dabbed at her eyes. A man set down his glass, ashamed to sip. Even so fired Hale, seated near her father, hot tears brimming. Vanessa's voice softened but carried further still. I am not ashamed to serve. Honest work is never shameful, but I refuse to let anyone make me small. Not you, Mr. Hale. Not this system. Not anyone. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. It was the silence of people realizing they had witnessed truth, and the truth is rarely comfortable. Raymond Hale stood trembling, his face a storm of rage. But the guests weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at her. The billionaire had lost his stage. The maid had claimed it. The ballroom hung in silence. A silence so dense it pressed against the glass where the chandeliers, smothering even the soft hum of the air conditioning. Raymond Hale's jaw worked furiously, his fists clenched at his sides. He looked like a man who had been stripped bare in his own kingdom. But no more one rushed to defend him. Instead, the guests, the senators, the bankers, the actors, the socialites shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some glanced at the floor, some at their wine. Others stared at Vanessa with something new in their eyes. Not pity, not condescension, but recognition. The woman in the silver gown, the one who had admired her fluency before, spoke first. She's right, she sighed softly, but the words carried. We all heard it. And we all saw how you spoke to her just now. Ray. A murmur rippled around the table. The senator who had once joked about her education cleared his throat. The young lady has more dignity than half the people I've campaigned with. He looked straight at Hale. Andy, you just revealed more about yourself than you probably intended. Hale's face darkened. She is a maid, hired to serve. That's all this is. But the guests weren't buying it. Not anymore. A banker who had once laughed at Hale's jokes now leaned back in his chair, smirking. You know, Ray, I think tonight you were the one being served a lesson. Laughter broke, not cruel, but knowing, a crack in the fortress of Hale's power. For the first time in memory, the billionaire had no more comeback. Vanessa stood with her tray at her side, her chest rising and falling. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. She was simply whole and unbroken, in a space that had been designed to erase her. So Hale rose quietly from her seat. All eyes turned as she crossed the room, heels clicking against marble. Andy stopped beside Vanessa. Her voice was soft but steady. She doesn't belong in the shadows. Not tonight. Not ever again. She reached out and took Vanessa's hand. Gasps rippled, not from scandal but from the sight of Hale standing in solidarity with a maid. Raymond's voice roared across the room. Sophia, sit down. But she didn't. Her eyes, so much like her mother's, burned with defiance. No more. Father, you sit down. For once in your life, listen. The room froze. Hale's face crumpled with rage. But no more words came. His own daughter had silenced him. Andy, in that silence, Vanessa realized this was her moment to leave. She set the tray on the nearest table, smoothed the front of her uniform, and turned to the crowd. Thank you. She sighed simply, but I don't need your applause. I don't need your pity. I only need what I've always had, the truth of who I am. Andy, that truth is enough. She looked once, briefly, at Hale. His face was red, his eyes glassy with fury, but she didn't shrink from him. Then she turned, Andy with her head held high. She walked through the grand double doors and out of the mansion. The silence followed her like an honor guard. Outside, the night air was cool against her face. She breathed deeply, each breath washing the weight of years from her chest. For the first time in a long time, she felt taller than the mansion behind her. Her phone buzzed. A message from her younger brother lit up the cracked screen. How's work? You okay? She smiled faintly. Andy typed back. Better than okay. Something changed tonight. Andy had. Inside the mansion, the guests slowly rose, gathering coats, whispering to one another. The night's glamour had dissolved into something rawer, heavier. Some would forget. Some would retell it at parties. But for a few, for Sophia, for the woman in silver, even for the jaded senator, Vanessa's words would linger, carving questions into the marble of their certainty. Raymond Hale sat alone at the head of his table, brandy untouched, the weight of silence pressing harder than any ridicule. For the first time, he understood that money couldn't buy back a moment once it belonged to truth. Andy, the truth was this. He had been conquered in his own house, not by another billionaire, not by a rival, but by the very person he had dismissed as invisible. Epilogue. Months later, in a modest community college classroom, Vanessa stood at the front with chalk in her hand. The students, some older, some fresh out of high school, Some juggling jobs like she once did listened closely as she wrote Arabic phrases on the board. She was teaching now, not at the United Nations, not in some ivory tower, but here where knowledge mattered, where voices were often ignored, where people like her were building futures in spite of the world. Her armor, her education, her dignity, her refusal to break was finally being used for what it was meant to do. Lift others. And somewhere across the city, in a glass office tower, Raymond Hale sat in a meeting, his empire intact but his pride permanently scarred. He would never admit it aloud, but he would never forget the night when the maid silenced the billionaire. Final line. In a world where wealth and prejudice tried to dictate who mattered, Vanessa Carter had spoken, and the room, the mansion, the world itself, had no more choice but to listen.